For this project, I decided to interview my stepmother Brenda because she has always told such intriguing and interesting stories about her life. The portion I have decided to present are her stories which I think are the best and reflect her time while living in the BVI. The first story that is told is about Brenda moving from Manhattan Beach, California to Tortola in the British Virgin Islands. This story reflects the concept of enculturation because she had to adjust her way of living to fit the culture in the BVI. She had to get used to having limited resources and become accustomed to being a businesswoman in a developing country. This is a personal experience narrative because it is her first-hand account of her unique move to a completely new place she was not familiar with.
I was like, "Where's the BVI?" We'd been to Hawaii and lots of stuff like that, and I knew about the U.S. Virgin Islands, but I'd never really heard about the British Virgin Islands in specific. So then I went out there and I did a test on the job, and it was really exciting. And so then I was like, well, that's kind of a big change to go from Los Angeles or Manhattan Beach to Tortola. And my dad said, well, Brenda, people don't get these opportunities very often. And I thought, well, okay, I'll go. So he helped me move all my stuff into storage, and then they looked after my little dog, Peppercita Langosta, and off I went. And it was really hard at first. I didn't have a husband, and most people are usually men and they have wives, and they're also kind of more on the edge, not the comforts of a United States. So there was no zip codes, there was no street signs, there was no postal service, there was no infrastructure at all. They just put up a stoplight. The electricity didn't work hardly at all. And so all of these things, but I had a gorgeous big house, so I should have been comfortable. But I called up my father, and I'd never done that before, ever. And I was 35 or 33, or I don't know, in my 30s. And it was like, I just don't think I can't even find my house. And this is back when, cell phones didn't work that great. And I was like, wow, I don't know. So he came out and stayed with me a couple weeks, and then taught me and the hills are so steep, you have to have 4-wheel drive. Oh. And I couldn't get out of my driveway because you had to have 4-wheel drive in reverse, and I didn't know how to drive 4-wheel drive. And here I had a Range Rover, and I had never engaged it in 4-wheel drive in California. So once I kind of got that, and then George, my dad, was like, Brenda, you're not going to get what you want when you want. Electricity just doesn't come on, But I was also working like a proper consultant American, which is very hard, 12 hours a day. So I wasn't working on island time. And so, conference calls come in from the States, and they're like, why aren't you on them? And I'm like, well, there's nobody in the office. The electricity doesn't work, Yeah. So there was all these challenges to do, but it was really exciting. And after a few months, I understood West Indian.
Oh, wow.
I could get around easy, and then I started really enjoying the gorgeous water, and making friends with really interesting people, and it's a small town, and you start to know, it's just really great. So after that, I was like, wow. And I really enjoyed my time there because it's so beautiful.
Yeah. The next story Brenda tells is about a serious accident she had while living in Tortola. This also reflects enculturation because the atmosphere of the hospital differed immensely compared to those in the States. She had to adapt and include their culture in her life in order to be healed. This story also teaches a lesson to be cautious and to not judge things based on the way they look. This is much like the trickster tales we studied, which teach us lessons to prevent harm in our own lives.
Another accident, maybe about couple months later, and I was cooking macaroni and cheese in my little kitchen. And keep in mind, there's no Whirlpool or Viking stoves down there, unless, of course, you're Richard Branson or somebody.
Yeah.
And I just was cooking it, and the gas somehow made an explosion in the oven, and I was thrown back in my kitchen, knocked out, and burnt all over my body.
Oh, wow.
30%. And of course, there's no ambulance to call 911. So I'm like, trying to get my neighbor. I'm calling everybody I know. What? And of course I'm hysterical. And that's so out of character for me. So people were like, what's going on? And finally they took me to the hospital, and that was a major ordeal. They had to treat me for 24 hours in intensive care, which really is just, the room that you enter in. And then they moved me up to a private room, which there was only one private room. But one of my really close friends was the surgeon on the island. And so he had come and met me and took care of all that stuff for me. And I was in the hospital for a week, and I had the best nursing care. There was no technology at all, but I had somebody checking my vitals. I had somebody putting on my creams. I had somebody looking on after me. The nursing was amazing, and you wouldn't have thought, because it was such a small little place. And then I healed up so good. And of course, I had chest x-rays, and of course the chest x-ray was like, not like here, it's just like you just kind of stand there in the hall and they do it. And and I also had such a good support system after being there, that the nurses are like, we don't know who you are, but you must be some princess of something, because we've never had so many visitors coming in to look after you. And so they let me go home once my mother had come out, because they won't let you go home unless there's somebody to look after you on the island, or there. And so I went to check out, and I was in pretty good shape. I wasn't, I was still healing, and but I wanted to go home. So as soon as they thought I was stable and I could go home, I went to check out, and it cost $356 for 7 days in the hospital, all the nursing care, all the medications, all the x-rays, all the intensive care, and they actually asked me if I had insurance. So, but,
Oh, wow.
The completely different healthcare system, but it was awesome. And I actually did have international insurance, but I just didn't need it. So
was that amount without insurance?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was somehow, but I guess I came under the British healthcare system, which I was unfamiliar with, but I couldn't believe it when I left, that it was only that much.
Yeah, wow. That's crazy.
So, and I healed up great. So I got really lucky.
Oh.
But I rested after that, and then I came back.
The last story is a personal experience narrative that is more lighthearted and explains the time Brenda lost her dad in the baths, which are a tourist attraction in Virgin Gorda, an island in the BVI. This is a direct account of a unique experience Brenda had when her father came to visit. Something that is interesting about this story is that it reflects Gottschall's idea of being the protagonist in our own stories and not always remembering the details correctly. In fact, in Gottschall's book, he states, "Our memories are not precise records of what actually happened, and many of the details are unreliable." When I have heard this exact same story from my grandpa many times, he always tells it in a slightly different way, with him as the less helpless character.
The significant historical and beautiful attractions is called the baths, and it's these enormous, stunning rocks that are clustered, and you go and you can walk through them and hang out on the beach and see. And what it is it's when during slave times, when people would come over, the slaves would come over from Africa, they would bathe there. That's where, and it was just set up so you couldn't really get out, and that was why it's called the baths. But now it's just this stunning area, little teeny park. Well, you go in and I was changing my clothes in the bathroom before we go into the entrance, because there's a beach to the right and then an entrance where the rock is to the left. Well, George went into his to the boys and I went to the girls. So I came out and I was waiting for George and no George. And then so I thought, well, maybe he already went in. So then I was like, I went in and I was like, have you seen an older gentleman? And at this time he looked very much like Sean Connery, like, you know, an Indiana Jones, Sean Connery. And so then I started hearing through, you know, have you seen that older gentleman? He's by himself and he looks like Sean Connery. We think Sean Connery's in the back. So, and I'm running through and it's climbing. You climb. It's not easy to get through these things. It's not just like a little path. You have to climb over the rocks and up little ladders and all around. And I'm checking every alcove and everything and I can't find him. And then I start seeing people. Oh, is your dad... Have you lost your dad? So now it's like this communication of other people coming back and I'm going forward. And I went back and forth twice. And then finally I went up the back of the hill and somebody said, we've seen your dad. And I kept having these sightings of George, Sean Connery. Yes, he's looking for his daughter. Oh, yes. And they're back and forth. And then finally I got up there and he was there and he had a bottle of water and he was so relieved that I found him because he was an old guy that he's like, oh, I didn't know what you were going to tell your brothers when I lost dad in the past. I don't know. What's she going to do? And, oh, it was just a very crazy time. Yeah. It was so exciting. Oh.